frequently that the most important political office is that of the private citizen. We also said that if we desire respect for the law, we must first make the law respectable. And that when our government teaches the whole people by its example. If the government becomes the lawbreaker, it breeds contempt for law, it invites every man to become a law unto himself, and invites anarchy. And then lastly, the great legal scholar Humpty Dumpty explained to Alice through the looking glass that when I use a word, it means just what I say it means, no more, no less. And that's what's become of our legal system in many ways. The law has become what whoever wants to be, the judge or whoever's interpreting it, wants it to be at the time. The foundation of our republic is the rule of law. And we see what's happening up in Washington, in the swamp there, in the swamp of Sacramento, but we also have a swamp here in San Bernardino County. And we have a DA that is part of that swamp and has been a part of that swamp for a long time. And we're very pleased that we have somebody, Jason Anderson, who is running to help drain the swamp here in San Bernardino County and to restore the rule of the law and equal justice before the law for all people here in San Bernardino County. And I said, by the way, these DA races are very important. They're so important that George Soros is backing and contributing to his candidates in DA races all over the country because he understands how important law enforcement is, and he doesn't want equal justice before the law. He wants a leftist justice before the law. So, Jason, come on up, and we are pleased to endorse you, and you can tell the people why they should support and vote for you. Jason Anderson.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening. It's certainly an honor to be here, and it's an honor to have received your endorsement. I had the pleasure of meeting with Carolyn several weeks ago, and some of the other members. Agnes, Greg was there, had a wonderful discussion, and I'm really honored and pleased to be here this evening. Real quickly, I just want to say this because I feel compelled, because in terms of Judge Harrison being up here before, I can tell you that I've been had the privilege of working with Judge Harrison. We were both deputy district attorneys together in the DA's office, also worked with his wife, Diane Harrison. I then had the honor to be in his court as a prosecutor when he was a judge. I've also been in his court as a private attorney in the private sector, and I can tell you that Judge Harrison does the right things for the right reasons. He's been a wonderful example of respecting the rule of law in this county for as long as he's been here, and certainly his time on the bench has been magnificent. So I can't think of a better guy to back, so you guys are backing the right guy. So Judge Harrison, good luck to you. I don't think you're going to need it, but for wherever it's worth, you know you've always had my support. I appreciate that. I did have the pleasure of going to the National Prayer Breakfast this morning at the Ontario Doubletree. I got to sit next to Sean Flynn. He was there. I met him before, a wonderful guy, so I'm pleased to see in terms of your guys' support of that. So I feel very, very comfortable in this room with the people I'm surrounded by. As Greg said, it's time to bring back the rule of law in the county of San Bernardino, and it's time to restore integrity, trustworthiness, and most of all, commitment. One of the things that I have seen as a veteran prosecutor for 17 years, I was in the office from 1998 till 2014. For 13 of those years, I did nothing but crimes against children. So people who physically and sexually abuse kids, those were the people that I prosecuted. In 2014, I lost my taste for the office, and I decided it was time for me to leave to go into the private sector. The office was becoming too political. The desire was the incumbent wanted to be anywhere other than San Bernardino County. He wanted to run for this office, for that office, and so everything that was done was turned into politics. And what happened was it started to send the message to the people in the office that worked very hard that it didn't really matter what they were doing. It was all going to matter for the subjective interest of the incumbent and the next political platform that he may want to move on to. I have made a commitment, and I've told anyone who would listen, is that my only interest is, once I'm the DA, is to roll up my sleeves and be the DA in this county. I'm not interested in running for any other office. I'm not interested for any other position. I'm not interested about how anything comes my way. I'm not about that. I will be around as long as the good people of San Bernardino County want to vote me back into the district attorney's office, a position that I believe needs to be earned and not simply through the inertia of incumbency. I'm not interested in any of that. And it's with that perspective that once I get in there, in terms of looking at the mission of the office, is to prove cases that can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's really the end of the story. It's about public safety. It's not about politics. I'm not interested in that. It's also about, in this day and age, particularly in California, talking about and educating the public through transparent ways. What is the cost of the DA's office? What is the largest and most powerful law office in the county of San Bernardino doing with its money and its resources? Is it spending $50 million to try to politically prosecute people to no end simply because you have an axe to grind? That's exactly what Greg was talking about. That's not the rule of law, and that's not what should be done, and I'm not going to do that in terms of my experience. I have the benefit of having been a prosecutor for 17 years and also being out in the private sector for the last 4. I represent people who are charged with crimes. I represent people who have businesses. I have private clients. I represent people that need representation in employee issues. Coming from the private sector and looking back in the DA's office that I was in for 17 years, I understand the importance of devoting the finest resource to keeping the members of this county safe, period. It's not about nepotism, it's not about favoritism, it's not about who's in your camp and who's not in your camp. It's about applying the law equally to everyone, and that is the way in which you set the tone, you set the culture, and you change the narrative in this county in regards to politics. And I want to be the leader on that. I want to be the guy that everybody looks at and says, here's a stable, family-oriented guy, been married for 23 years to the love of my life with 2 wonderful kids. That's what I long to get home to every night, and that's what will drive my mission every day. And I want to give you a really quick example. I've had a lot of questions throughout this campaign about how I feel about SB 54, sanctuary cities. I've shared some of my thoughts with Greg this morning, or this afternoon when we talked on the radio in terms of that, and I applaud your efforts to go into city council meetings and telling them how you feel and being active in that and saying that you don't want to be a part of that. The DA's office doesn't really have jurisdiction over that, and that's one of the things that oftentimes people don't understand. But here's an example of, on a sort of a micro level of how that works, and I see this in court. What happens is, and I explained this to Greg earlier, is that this is really the application of equality and where equality in the law needs to stand regardless of who's in a courtroom. If you have person A charged with a crime, who was born here, who's a citizen, who's here legally, and you have person B who's charged with the same crime, and they're not here legally, those 2 people ought to be treated the same. What happens oftentimes in court is person B is given a lesser sentence perhaps because that's going to impact their status in the country, with no regard to person A. In my mind, I believe that's inequality treatment, and I think you treat people the same as they're situated. And I've seen that go on in court. I don't like it. Don't like it personally, and not necessarily for a lot of political reasons other than I think that speaks volumes in terms of how you approach the job when you have the most important, the most powerful mission in the largest law office in the county of San Bernardino is to treat people equally, fairly, with transparency, and to make sure that you set the tone in terms of the culture and the narrative of the person who you are, to restore integrity, to remember that when you are devoting resources of prosecution, those resources are not unlimited. It comes from the taxpayers. The taxpayers are the ones that are funding the office. I want to know from the taxpayers, where do you want your resources spent? What are the problems in your neighborhood? What are the issues in your community that are affecting you in regards to your public safety? Because that drives everything, and you guys know that drives everything. My desire is to get in the community, to hear that feedback, and not to think that I know best, and not to think that I'm the smartest guy in the room because I was lucky enough to get elected. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you guys. For too long, it's been nothing about the incumbent and trying to seek greater office, political platform, and power somewhere else. I want to be right here. I want to be with you folks. I want to keep you safe. I want to keep politics out of it, and I want it to all be about public safety. And I appreciate your support in this particular race.
Thank you, Jason. If anyone has any questions, come forward to the microphone. And I'm going to take the first question and give you a chance to explain. If like me, you're probably receiving large numbers of very expensive mailers that explain Ramos's record. This is being put out by a group called Business Leaders for Fair and Ethical Government. Who are they, and what's your connection to them, so people can understand that? Very good question, and I've been asked this question out on the campaign trail. This is a number of individuals who were prosecuted in what is known as the Colonies case. If you followed in the paper in terms of the Colonies case, it spawned out of what happened was civil litigation over a plot of land in Upland that developers wanted to develop. There was a water basin that was at issue between, did the county abandon it, was there an easement, who owned it, and who was responsible for the repairs on the project. The business owners went forward, they repaired the land, the county sued them, there were lawsuits, and the individuals, the business owners who had the land and did all development, they won 2 lawsuits. They won 2 civil lawsuits above board in open court where everybody could go observe, and the opinions were all published. The county didn't like it. After that, there were some frayed relationships, and so what happened was that there were some donations to some already established political action committees that those developers made in terms of trying to mend the fences and say, hey, listen, we gave you the opportunity to settle this thing for $77 million. We got a judgment that said it was worth $300 million. We finally got a settlement for 1/3 of what it was worth. We'd like to just make sure we can go forward, so we'll give you some money in the pack. The DA's office charged these guys with bribery, fraud, and they were maligned for about 6 or 7 years. And then the trial lasted about 9 months, and in less than a day, the individuals were acquitted. The case really fell apart, and so these guys were obviously motivated to make sure that there's not someone in the position to have a lack of discretion and exercise of judgment. They want to make sure that politics don't enter into a prosecutorial decision, because once you're on the receiving end of the leverage that the government can put on you, particularly from the prosecution's office, it's almost impossible to withstand in terms of that. One of the gentlemen in here was able to do it. The only person I have any connection with in that case was a gentleman by the name of Mark Kirk, who was a friend of mine since 2002, 2003, similarly situated, family similar, married for the same amount of time. Mark did nothing. Had to go bankrupt, lost his job, everything as a result of this. Had no culpability in that, and the jurors agreed with that. And that's some of the stuff that's coming out on these mailers, and it's subjective. I'm willing to stand up and say, if obviously people think that somehow I'm propped up, that's not the case. This is an example of what happens when power is exercised poorly. Some of the jurors in that case sat through all the evidence for 9 months and found and acquitted within less than a day. And they recorded in the newspaper, you grow up being told that the government and law enforcement are the good guys, but they were pulling a fast one on us and bringing up things that weren't true. Another one said that I never thought the DA's office was corrupt until after the trial. He spent $50 million tax dollars in that political prosecution, and as he said, that these guys had the money to defend themselves, but when you don't have the money, like someone like us they go after for political reasons. What happens to us when we don't have that kind of money? And that's why we're supporting Jason. Carrie.
I just have 2 questions. Is your election on June 5th?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the election?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's only 2 of us, so it's winner take all.
Okay, so there are signs, and he's going to need some help putting out the signs. You just have to remember to take them down within 10 days of the election. So he has plenty of signs if anybody wants to help.
Okay. And I want to say one thing too, Greg, and I think it's a proper concern for those of people that I work with in the DA's office for so long that still continue to be my friends. There's a concern that there are people that are certainly motivated by what they went through for 6, 7, or 8 years, and most of us, I don't think hardly any of us in this room would have been able to withstand it. I certainly wouldn't have. And the question to me is, well, is there going to be something that you think that you owe these guys? Because, they're motivated perhaps for a different reason to see a change in leadership, the right leadership in the rule of law come in. The answer is no, and those guys know that. What happened to them, they don't want to happen to anyone else. They know through my body of work for the last 20 years that I'm the guy that will restore the integrity in the office. They're not asking for anything, and they know that my integrity and my standards and the fact that I'm an attorney and hopefully be running the largest law office in the county of San Bernardino, non-lawyers from the outside can't have a say in things. I mean, certainly these guys are interested, but I know the job. I know it from every angle, and I've been fortunate to build up a reputation to say that, you know, these guys are motivated, and I think for the right reasons, but it certainly is not going to be a situation in which I'm not going to keep my eye on the mission of the office, which is to keep you folks safe.
Anyone else have a question? If not, he's another guy. Support him, because the rule of law is important. Take a sign. And Carolyn has something to say.
Actually, I'd like Agnes to come up, because one of the issues that we discussed when we talked to this fine man is victims' rights.
Right.
Yeah, the question that I had for you when we met at Greg and Carolyn's home was, is your office going to be handling victims' rights? As it is, victims' rights are being violated in spite of Marcy's law. Victims have many rights, and if you read the Victims' Bill of Rights, the most important ones say upon request. If you don't know what your rights are, you have none. Because being tormented, grieving families, they're not going to think what the legalities of any case is. How are you going to change your office to serve victims better, more compassionately, and give them the service that's due to them by our laws?
Thanks, Agnes. I appreciate that, and we did talk about that at length when we first met. Victims, their families, and their cases shouldn't be used as props for political gain. They should be treated as human beings. There needs to be continuity and consistency. In a situation that Agnes has had to go through in her family, it should be the same people every time, keeping her aware of what's going on. And Agnes is right. In terms of Marcy's law, it's gone quite a ways in terms of victim rights. But one of the things that it says is that it's the victim upon request wanting to be engaged in the process. Well, we know how that works generally, is that if you're in a situation where you're grieving and you're thinking about everything else, you're not going to understand the legal process and say, well, what does that mean that I have to ask to be informed? What Agnes and I talked about, and what I like about in terms of having some experience in the private sector in a law practice, is the DA's office needs to affirmatively go out and not wait for the request, but like you would in a private law firm, is you send out a letter, you document the file, and you notify the victims that we are here for you. We want to hear what you have to say. Consider this your request, and now we were going to be sensitive to what you want to have done, and most importantly, to keep you informed of the hearings, of the timing, of the offers, of a potential sentence, of a time when you can make an impact statement, to keep you informed at every single stage. I believe that that's our duty, because we know the system, and we need to give folks that have been in Agnes's position their time to grieve and to heal the way they want to, instead of worrying about some process that they're not necessarily going to understand. And it's really the continuity, I think, that we talked about in terms of having the same outreach so that you feel comfortable with who you are dealing with, and every time you come to court, it's not someone different. But there's nothing you need to do to avail yourself to the services that we can give you. You don't have to ask for anything. We want to come to you, and we want to document our file and say, we have reached out to Agnes or someone like Agnes and says, this is what we're going to do for you. We're not going to wait on that condition. We're going to reach out to you.
Thank you. Also, as a victim, I have noticed that the courts do not follow up with families. And I've known Mr. Ramos, DA Ramos, for many, many years, since I ran a support group for families of murdered victims. And I am ashamed to say that I called his office almost 3 weeks ago. I got a call back from one secretary, and I said I needed to speak to him privately. And she transferred me to his private secretary, Julia. Anyways, I'm yet to get a phone call from Mr. Ramos. That is not okay.
And Agnes, I appreciate what I would say, and we talked about this again. If I, in my private law practice, had a consistent recurring call from a client, and I didn't call them back for 3 weeks or 3.5 or 4 weeks, and then I put them over to someone else, the state bar would be wondering, what kind of lawyer am I, okay? The DA's office needs to be run the same way. It needs to be run by someone who understands the needs and the interest of what I would consider a client in a situation that Agnes has been in, and not just someone else who later down the road you can use as a number to say, hey, look how great I was at getting this prosecution. Those numbers are easy to get. The time to roll up our sleeves and the messy parts, the messy middles, are servicing and being able to be close to someone like Agnes and going out there and not waiting 3.5, 4 weeks for somebody to get back to her that isn't even involved in the process. So we treat you like clients, not like a number.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
I think it's very clear why we have supported this man. Let's get him into office. Do you agree? Thank you, Jason. And before we move on, I just want to remind you that we have some nice little